These skills can damage relationships when your analysis leads to false conclusions. The indicators we've discussed don't definitively prove deception. They suggest cognitive and emotional stress that might result from various causes. When you misinterpret normal behaviors as signs of lying, you may treat honest people with unwarranted suspicion, damaging trust in ways difficult to repair. Hashtag key limitations of deception detection. Several important factors affect the reliability of these techniques. Cultural differences significantly impact communication patterns. What represents respect or disrespect varies widely across cultures. Some value emotional expressiveness, others prize restraint. Neurodivergent expression patterns present another critical limitation. People with autism spectrum conditions, or ADHD, often display different baseline behaviors in eye contact, facial expressiveness, movement, and speech patterns that reflect their neurological wiring rather than deception. Situational factors and psychological conditions further complicate assessment. Environmental factors, power dynamics, and conversation topics affect behavioral displays independently of truthfulness. Anxiety disorders create increased self-soothing behaviors during truthful communication. Trauma responses can trigger dissociation that appears as emotional disconnection. Without accounting for these variables, deception detection becomes dangerously inaccurate. Hashtag ethical application guidelines. Given these complexities, when might you appropriately apply these techniques? High-stakes professional situations, job interviews, significant negotiations, or important business discussions represent appropriate contexts for careful observation. Significant decisions involving substantial risk warrant thoughtful analysis when combined with other forms of due diligence. In personal relationships, these techniques serve better as tools for identifying communication patterns needing exploration rather than as deception detectors. When you notice clusters of stress, indicators during certain discussions, this observation might prompt compassionate conversation about why those topics create difficulty, rather than accusations of dishonesty. Respectful application requires several guiding principles. Focus on patterns rather than isolated behaviors. Actively consider alternative explanations for any patterns you observe. Approach potential deception with curiosity rather than accusation. Perhaps most importantly, remain aware of the danger of becoming overly suspicious. Excessive focus on potential dishonesty creates a distorted worldview where trust becomes impossible. Remember that most people tell the truth most of the time, even if occasional deception occurs. The most valuable application of these skills isn't catching others in lies, but building deeper understanding and more authentic connections. When you notice potential indicators of stress in others' communication, you gain insight into topics that create difficulty for them. Insight that can foster compassion rather than suspicion. Used ethically, deception detection skills enhance your ability to navigate complex human interactions with both wisdom and compassion. You become more attuned to the full spectrum of human communication, recognizing when words align with emotional and physical expressions, and when disconnects suggest internal conflict worthy of gentle exploration. As we conclude our exploration of ethical application, consider how you might practice these skills in ways that enhance rather than damage your relationships. The development of these observational abilities represents a journey requiring both technical skill and ethical wisdom. Using these skills with integrity and responsibility not only protects your relationships, but also prepares you to apply these techniques effectively in appropriate situations. Practical applications, developing your skills. Deception detection isn't an innate talent that some people mysteriously possess while others lack. It represents a skill set that anyone can develop through deliberate practice and thoughtful application. Think about learning to play a musical instrument or mastering a sport. You begin with basic principles and gradually develop proficiency through consistent practice. The same approach applies to recognizing the signs of deception. With specific exercises and regular application, you can train your mind to notice patterns that most people miss entirely. The journey from understanding these concepts to applying them effectively requires moving beyond theory to practical application. Many people read about deception detection, intellectually grasp the principles, but never develop actual skill because they fail to practice systematically. This resembles reading about swimming without entering the water. True proficiency emerges only through repeated application in real-world situations, beginning with low-stakes interactions where mistakes carry minimal consequences. Here are key practice techniques to develop your deception detection skills. Microexpression recognition. Train yourself to identify the 7 universal expressions: anger, fear, disgust, surprise, happiness, sadness, and contempt. Start with longer displays and gradually reduce viewing time. Try watching emotionally charged television with the sound muted to focus entirely on facial movements during moments of tension. Baseline observation. Establish behavioral patterns for people during neutral conversations. Note their typical speaking pace, gesture frequency, vocal qualities, and facial animation. This trains your attention to notice individual differences, rather than applying generic interpretations. Language pattern analysis. Analyze conversations for linguistic indicators, distancing language, pronoun use, sensory details, and qualification phrases. This trains your ear to notice these patterns in real time without written analysis. Have you noticed how your friends' speaking patterns change when discussing sensitive topics? What baseline behaviors have you observed in your regular interactions? Integrated practice. Use news interviews to practice multiple detection skills simultaneously. Establish baseline behavior during non-controversial portions, then watch for clusters of changes when the conversation shifts to difficult topics. This develops your ability to recognize behavioral clusters rather than isolated signs. In everyday practice, incorporate these observations naturally into normal interactions. Ask open-ended questions about neutral topics to establish baselines, then notice if patterns change when conversation shifts. Maintain curiosity rather than suspicion, approaching the practice as an exploration of human communication. Feedback is essential for improving accuracy. Without knowing when you're right or wrong, you might reinforce incorrect assumptions. Notice when your observations are later confirmed or contradicted by additional information. Did the behavioral patterns you noticed actually correlate with later discovered truth? Resources for continued learning include What Everybody is Saying by Joe Navarro, Telling Lies by Paul Ekman, Spy the Lie by Philip Houston, online courses from the Paul Ekman Group, certification programs from the Center for Body Language. Consider Michael's experience. After 6 months of practice, he noticed his teenage son's microexpressions of distress despite verbal assurances that everything was fine. Rather than challenging him, Michael created space for open conversation, eventually learning about bullying issues his son had been concealing. These skills didn't just help me catch a lie, Michael shared. They helped me understand when someone I care about needed support they couldn't ask for directly. How might these skills transform your important relationships? When have you sensed something was being withheld, but couldn't pinpoint why? Maintain a learning mindset, rather than assuming expertise too quickly. The Dunning-Kruger effect proves particularly dangerous in deception detection. Beginners often express the highest confidence, while genuine experts recognize the complexity and limitations of these skills. Approach your development with humility, recognizing that proficiency develops over years rather than days. With consistent practice and ethical application, you develop a nuanced understanding of human communication that extends beyond spotting lies. You begin perceiving rich layers of meaning in interactions, the alignment or disconnect between words, expressions, body language, and vocal qualities. You notice internal conflict, passion, struggle to articulate complex thoughts, and complete congruence across all channels. This deeper awareness transforms how you experience human interaction. You recognize patterns revealing internal states, allowing you to respond with greater empathy. You become more attentive to complete messages rather than just words. Most importantly, you develop appreciation for the complexity of human communication. People rarely fit into simple categories of truthful or deceptive, but express themselves through intricate combinations of authentic sharing, social performance, emotional management, and occasional deception. As we reach the end of our exploration, consider what you've truly gained beyond techniques for catching someone in a lie. You've developed a framework for understanding the full spectrum of human communication. The complex interplay between words, expressions, movements, and voice that reveals our internal worlds. When applied ethically, these skills create deeper connections based on genuine understanding. You recognize internal conflict, offer compassion instead of interrogation, and appreciate authentic communication. The goal was always about developing awareness to navigate relationships with wisdom and compassion, creating space for truth to emerge naturally. What connections might you deepen tomorrow with this newfound understanding?